Hey guys, welcome back. Get comfortable, pull your blanket up, and let's take a slow, sleepy walk back to a time when love letters were written with goose feathers, and the biggest dating app was, well, your local harvest festival. Tonight, we're drifting into the Middle Ages, that strange, muddy, candlelit era when people talked about love in poems, but married mostly for goats, land, or political alliances. Don't worry though, this isn't going to be one of those dry history lectures where someone shouts courtly love. This is your bedtime story version, slow, cozy, a bit funny, and probably better listened to lying down. It's late evening, in a medieval village. The air smells of wood smoke and hay. Someone's baking bread somewhere nearby, the kind that's a little too hard, but still good when dipped in ale. You're sitting near a crackling fire, and someone's about to tell you how people used to find love, before texting, before Tinder, and before deodorant. Let's start with the most important truth. In the Middle Ages, people didn't really date. The word itself didn't exist the way we know it today. There were no first dates, no seeing how it goes, and certainly no its complicated relationship status. In most parts of Europe, love was tangled up with duty, family, religion, and sometimes a bit of danger. If you were a peasant, your romantic prospects depended mostly on your parents, your land, and how many cows you could bring to the table, literally. If you were noble, things were even more complicated. You could write all the love poems you wanted, but at the end of the day, your family expected you to marry someone who came with political advantages, money, or an army. So, you see, love wasn't really about butterflies, but that doesn't mean people didn't feel love. Picture this. A young knight who is supposed to marry a noble lady from a neighboring castle, but he is secretly in love with a peasant girl who brings water to the courtyard every morning, or a lady who sits by her window, writing songs for a man she can never be seen with in public. The medieval world might look rigid and rule-bound, but behind those thick stone walls, hearts still beat the same way they do now, clumsy, hopeful, sometimes broken. Dating, or rather courting, looked different depending on who you were. If you were a peasant, the whole process was refreshingly simple, but not exactly romantic. You'd meet someone at a festival or in the fields, probably while threshing grain or tending sheep. If you liked them, you'd find excuses to work nearby, to talk, or share bread at lunch. And when the annual feast or fair came around, maybe, just maybe, you'd dance together to the sound of a lute and some off-key singing. For nobles though, things got theatrical. Courtship was a performance, a show of manners, restraint, and the right kind of longing. A knight might dedicate a song to a lady, or fight in her name in a tournament. But, and here's the tricky part, many of these gestures were meant to be symbolic, not literal. He might wear her colors, or her handkerchief, but that didn't mean they were actually together. In fact, sometimes they were never supposed to be together. That's where the idea of courtly love came in. A kind of idealized romance invented by troubadours and poets. It was all about admiring someone from afar, being loyal, writing verses, sighing dramatically, and not actually doing anything about it. Basically, medieval people had their own version of emotional texting, just slower, and with more poetry, but we'll get deeper into that later. For now, let's stay by this imaginary fire, and look at how all this started. In the early Middle Ages, say around the 9th or 10th century, love wasn't something people talked about much. Life was short, survival was hard, and emotions weren't exactly at the top of the to-do list. You had to feed your animals, pay your taxes, survive the winter, and maybe, if you were lucky, meet someone who didn't mind that you only bathed twice a year. For most peasants, marriages were arranged by families, not in a dramatic forced way necessarily, but in a very practical one. Parents looked at what made sense, who owned nearby land, who could share labor, who could provide stability. If not, well, you'd get used to it eventually. Even among peasants, love matches happened. Villagers met at seasonal fairs, big events full of music, food, and dancing. There were games, contests, even little booths where fortune-tellers promised to reveal your future husband. Somewhere between the roasted meat and the spilled ale, sparks flew, and sometimes, those sparks turned into marriages that lasted a lifetime, or at least until the next bad harvest. There were strict social rules about who could marry whom, and if you tried to cross those lines, say a peasant and a noble, or even to people from rival villages, you could find yourself in deep trouble. At worst, you'd be punished by the local lord or church for breaking moral codes. By the 12th century, Christian ideals had wrapped marriage in layers of religious significance. The church decided that marriage was sacred, a lifelong bond meant for procreation and faithfulness. Premarital affection, sinful. And where there are rules, there are always loopholes. They'd meet at wells or by rivers. Fetching water was the medieval version of let us grab coffee. They'd exchange tokens, maybe a piece of ribbon or a sprig of herbs that carried meaning. Rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, lavender for devotion. And if things got really serious, there might be a clandestine promise, a sort of pre-marriage vow made in private, before witnesses. These informal hand-fasting ceremonies could make a couple legally bound, at least in the eyes of their community. The church didn't always approve, but people did it anyway. Because, as it turns out, love doesn't wait for paperwork. Among nobles, however, love was almost never private. Everything had an audience. You couldn't just fall in love quietly. You had to do it with style. Ideally, while everyone at court was watching. Ladies would drop hints, a glance, a ribbon, a carefully chosen word. Knights would respond with gestures, a song, a joust, or a chivalric act of bravery. And poets, those medieval influencers, would turn these tiny moments into grand, romantic tales. Troubadours traveled from court to court, singing of impossible love stories, knights pining for married ladies, ladies longing for forbidden affection. Even the church, for all its disapproval, couldn't stop people from enjoying a bit of romantic daydreaming. But behind all the poetry and pageantry, there were real emotions and real heartbreak. Many noble women had little control over their marriages. They were often betrothed as children, sometimes before they'd even met their future husbands. And yet, even in that world of control and duty, they still found ways to love, to write, to feel, to hope. One noblewoman, for instance, might secretly send her knight a favor, a small embroidered token hidden in his armor before a tournament. It was dangerous, thrilling, and deeply human. In some ways, it's comforting to realize that even 800 years ago, people were still dealing with the same drama, just with more chainmail. So as you're lying here, listening, imagine those quiet moments between all the noise. A letter written by candlelight, sealed with wax and trembling hands. And as we drift deeper into this world, where affection had to survive cold winters, strict rules, and nosy priests, we'll start to see how people found ways to make it work. Because whether you're in the 1300s or today, love has always found a way. So close your eyes, if they aren't already heavy. Tomorrow, someone will wake early to bake bread, someone else to feed animals, and maybe somewhere in the village, a young heart will wonder what it's like to be loved. We'll pick up there next time, deeper into how people courted, flirted, and fell in love in a world where romance was both sacred and scandalous. Let the sound of old stories carry you back to that simpler, rougher time, when love was whispered, not posted. But the story doesn't really end there, does it? Because while you drift somewhere between sleep and imagination, life in that little medieval village keeps going. And the world of love, awkward, hopeful, and a little smoky, keeps unfolding quietly in the background. No alarms, no buzzing phones, just the chill of dawn, a few coughs from the neighbors, and the sound of someone chopping wood far off. In the corner of the house, a woman is already kneading bread. Outside, a young man is fixing a fence, pretending not to glance toward the wellware. Coincidentally, the girl he's been thinking about all winter just happens to be fetching water. Not in castles or tournaments, though the poets liked to pretend that's where all the love happened, but in small moments. A shared look by the well, a bit of teasing at a harvest feast, a few words exchanged while gathering firewood. The heart worked quietly back then, almost afraid to make noise. If you were a peasant, your dating life was woven right into your workday. You didn't have fancy inns or gardens to stroll in. When you worked beside someone every day, when you saw them tired, muddy, and human, and still liked them, that meant something. A young man might give a girl a small token, a bit of ribbon, or a charm made from woven straw. If she wore it the next day, it meant she liked him back. If she didn't, well, better luck next harvest. Festivals were where things got interesting. Every village had a few big ones each year. The Feast of St. John, midsummer fairs, harvest celebrations. These were the medieval version of dating apps. Everyone bathed, wore their best clothes, and tried their luck. There was music, dancing, food, and games, all of them suspiciously designed to let young people interact. One popular game was the apple toss. A girl would toss an apple to a boy she liked. If he caught it and took a bite, it was basically medieval flirting at its finest. Then there was the kiss under the garland game, usually after a bit of ale had gone around, where whoever got caught under a hanging wreath had to kiss the person next to them. It was all in good fun, though sometimes it led to a scandal or a sudden engagement. You see, in small villages, gossip traveled faster than any messenger. If someone saw you holding hands, the whole community knew by sunset. By the next morning, half the village was already predicting your wedding date. Well, there'd be whispers about why. Sometimes, things got complicated, especially when parents had their own plans. Maybe the boy's family wanted him to marry into another household for a bit of land. Maybe the girl's father didn't think the suitor had enough cows or a decent roof. And if you tried to argue, you'd be reminded that marriage wasn't just about love, it was about survival, alliances, and keeping the family from starving through winter. They'd sneak out at night to meet by the fields or riverside. Sometimes they'd even exchange vows privately, not officially married, but spiritually bound. If the church found out, you could be fined or shamed in public. But for two people who really believed they belonged together, that risk was worth it. And that's the quiet truth about medieval love. It wasn't all rigid and cold. It was alive, messy, and as defiant as it is today. Now, let's drift away from the fields for a bit, because love didn't just bloom among peasants. It took on very different colors in the courts of nobles. Their romance was practically a game, one with high stakes, beautiful rules, and very little chance of winning. Tapestries on the walls, a roaring fire, and a long table where nobles sit, pretending to enjoy their boiled meats. At the far end, a young knight glances up at a lady seated beside the lord of the castle. He shouldn't look, it's dangerous, but he does anyway. This is where the idea of courtly love takes shape, the kind of romance that wasn't about getting married, but about showing devotion, admiration, and idealized affection. It sounds strange now, but for nobles, real marriage wasn't about passion, it was a business deal. So, all those emotions, desire, infatuation, longing, had to go somewhere. They poured into secret crushes, songs, and poetry. A knight would dedicate his victories to a lady who wasn't his wife. He'd wear her colors on his sleeve, literally. He'd write her verses, full of dramatic sighing and metaphors about stars and hearts and chains of love. It was, in short, the medieval version of posting a thirst trap and tagging someone you shouldn't. Sometimes she'd encourage it, sometimes she'd ignore it, sometimes she'd play along just enough to keep the thrill alive. It was dangerous but deliciously so. There were rules to this kind of love, actual, written rules. A 12th century writer named Andreas Capellanus even wrote a whole book called The Art of Courtly Love. When made public, love rarely endures. Basically, he turned flirting into philosophy. The more impossible the love, the purer it was thought to be. That's why so many medieval love stories end in tragedy. Think Tristan and Isolde, a knight and a princess, bound by a love potion, doomed by their circumstances. Or Lancelot and Guinevere, the queen who loved King Arthur's best knight. Everyone knew those stories were scandalous, but everyone adored them anyway. They spoke to something real, the tension between duty and desire, rules and emotion. Because even in castles filled with gold, love was never easy. It made people reckless, poetic, and sometimes very stupid. Meanwhile, troubadours, those wandering poets, kept the whole system alive. They traveled from court to court, singing songs about forbidden love, beauty, and heartbreak. They were like medieval bards of the heart, part artist, part gossip, part therapist. Through their songs, they spread ideas about romance that slowly changed how people thought about love. Before them, love was practical. After them, love became something noble, even spiritual. And while most people still didn't marry for love, they started to believe that love was worth feeling anyway, even if it hurt. Back in the village, these songs eventually trickled down, sung by travelers or passed on by minstrels. Peasants who had never seen a castle or a knight would hum along, dreaming of their own version of those grand romances. It was like medieval pop culture, love stories that made people sigh and imagine something bigger than their daily lives. And maybe that's the secret to why love survived through all the mud and hardship. Even when life was rough, people wanted to believe in something beautiful, a feeling that made them look beyond hunger, war, and cold nights, a reason to keep going. So, whether it was a nobleman writing love poems or a shepherd carving initials into a tree, everyone played their part in this quiet symphony of affection. Love, in the Middle Ages, was fragile. It had to hide from priests, survive gossip, and live in letters that might never be read. But it was also persistent, a little rebellious flame that refused to die. And if you listen closely, in that half-dream state between wake and sleep, maybe you can still hear it, the sound of soft footsteps on stone floors, a whispered confession, a heartbeat that somehow echoes across the centuries. The fire in our story crackles lower now. The knight, the peasant, the lady, all their voices blur into the same soft hum of history, because, in the end, love made them all equal. It made them foolish, brave, and human. Tomorrow, when we pick up this story again, we'll step deeper into those moments, the secret signs, the rituals of flirting, the strange little games that lovers played when they couldn't say how they felt out loud. There were handkerchiefs with meanings, songs with hidden messages, and glances that said more than 1,000 words. It's time to drift there next. But for now, close your eyes. The candles are nearly gone. The air is warm, the night endless, and in some faraway corner of time, someone is still waiting by a well, hoping to be seen. Someone is still waiting by a well, hoping to be seen. The morning sun is soft and lazy, rolling over the thatched rooftops of a medieval village where the smell of damp hay and baking bread fills the air. Chickens cluck nearby, and a dog trots through the mud, tail wagging like it's on an important mission. The girl by the well pretends to be busy with her bucket, but her eyes keep glancing toward the road. She knows he'll pass soon. He always does. Down the lane, a boy pushes a cart of firewood, trying to act casual while his heart thumps like a drum in a festival band. His tunic is patched, his boots muddy, but today he's combed his hair with his fingers and tried to look well, not terrible. When their eyes meet, it's nothing grand. No choir of angels, no swelling lute music, just a flicker, a smile, a quick nod, and that's enough. This is what medieval dating often looked like. No candlelit dinners, no secret texts, no endless back and forth of seen messages, just glances across fields, awkward greetings at wells, and slow, patient waiting. It's simple, quiet, and oddly comforting, like everything in the Middle Ages. It takes time. As you walk through the village in your imagination, you see how every corner of life hums with small stories like this. The blacksmith's apprentice sneaks a look at the baker's daughter. The shepherd whistles softly when the weaver's girl passes by with her wool. It's all subtle, shy, and utterly human. And though love here moves at the pace of a plough horse, it still finds its way. During spring festivals, everything changes. The air smells of smoke and sweet cider, and people from neighboring hamlets crowd the square. Musicians play lively tunes while children chase ribbons. Somewhere near the bonfire, you spot her again, the girl from the well, laughing with her friends. The boy hesitates before walking closer. His palms are sweaty, though he doesn't know the word for it. He offers her a small carved token, a wooden heart, rough but sincere. She takes it, runs her fingers over the edges, and smiles in that slow, uncertain way people do when they realize something might be starting. No one calls it dating, but everyone watching knows what it means. Courtship in the Middle Ages was full of unspoken rules. There was no casual flirting. Everything had purpose. Parents watched closely. Neighbors gossiped. The priest always seemed to appear just when two young people stood too close. But love, like water, always found the cracks in those walls. When the boy couldn't speak openly, he might send small gifts instead, a bunch of herbs tied with thread, a lock of wool, or, if he was feeling bold, a single flower. Roses were rare, but daisies and violets carried messages too. Every flower meant something. Every gesture whispered a little secret. Some couples met in the fields while working. Others met at church, pretending to pray harder than usual just to sneak a look at someone a few pews away. Weddings themselves were public, noisy, and chaotic. But the quiet beginnings, the little moments that led there, were private treasures. In noble courts, love took on a completely different shape. Imagine, now leaving the muddy village road behind. The scene shifts. The sound of chickens fades, replaced by soft harp music echoing in a castle hall. Tapestries flutter gently in the draught. Servants whisper, carrying trays of spiced wine. At one end of the hall, a young lady sits by a window. She wears a gown the color of midnight and an expression halfway between boredom and melancholy. Across the room, a knight tries very hard not to stare. His armor gleams. He has written badly, but earnestly a poem in her honor. He can't give it to her directly, of course. That would be improper. So he slips it to a page, who slips it to her maid, who leaves it on her embroidery cushion, like it appeared by magic. The poem is full of clumsy metaphors. Her eyes are stars. Her smile the dawn, but it doesn't matter. She reads it, blushes, hides it quickly. And just like that, another impossible romance is born. This was the world of courtly love, a strange mix of passion, poetry, and restraint. You weren't supposed to act on it. You were supposed to feel it, to suffer beautifully in silence. Nobles believed that true love was noble precisely because it was unattainable. It wasn't about getting what you wanted. It was about longing, endless, elegant longing. You might think that sounds exhausting, and you'd be right. But to the medieval mind, that longing made life more meaningful. Troubadours sang about it. Poets wrote endless verses on it. Every sigh, every glance, every hopeless crush was proof that you were capable of refined emotion. And so, love became performance. A knight's courage on the battlefield was proof of his devotion. A lady's patience and modesty showed her virtue. It was all a dance, slow, symbolic, and filled with unspoken understanding. But beneath all that ceremony, real hearts still beat. Not every noble followed the rules. Affairs happened. Scandals brewed. Some ran away for love. Others paid for it dearly. The tension between ideal and reality made medieval romance both beautiful and tragic. Meanwhile, back in the village, love stayed practical. A good match meant shared labor and a steady life. Yet, people still dreamed. Even peasants hummed songs of knights and ladies, imagining their own simpler versions of those grand stories. Maybe a shepherd carved a whistle and played it at dusk, hoping someone across the fields might hear. Maybe a girl saved a bit of ribbon just to wear when he was around. The Middle Ages were full of contrast like that. Mud and moonlight, duty and desire, simplicity and yearning, and love, quiet, stubborn love, threaded through it all. As twilight falls again in your mind's eye, the well stands empty now. The boy has gone home, heart light as air. The girl hums to herself while folding laundry, unaware that centuries later, people will still wonder about love, just like hers. You sit by the fading fire in the corner of the inn, feeling the rhythm of that old world settle around you. The laughter from the festival echoes faintly through the night. Somewhere, a lute plays a sleepy tune. Maybe tomorrow brings another glance, another gift, another step toward something lasting. Because, in a time when life was short and uncertain, love even in its smallest form was a rebellion, a quiet promise that there was still beauty worth waiting for. So rest now. Let that idea linger, the idea that even in the rough, cold, candlelit Middle Ages, people still found warmth in one another. They found ways to smile, to hope, to feel something human. And that's really all dating ever was, no matter the century. The fire crackles low. The sound of the lute fades. Outside, the stars hang above the castle towers and cottage roofs alike. Maybe, somewhere under that same sky, someone's still waiting by a well. Someone's still waiting by a well. Though this time it's not for love, it's for gossip. The Middle Ages ran on rumor almost as much as it ran on bread. Wells, markets, and church steps were the medieval version of social media. People traded news, advice, and sometimes unsolicited opinions about who was courting whom. Picture it, two women leaning over the well, buckets resting on the stone edge. One whispers, "Did you hear about the miller's son?" The other gasps theatrically, "No, tell me everything." And just like that, a whole romance, real or imagined, starts rippling through the village, faster than you can say holy relic. It's funny how much attention love got back then, considering how few choices people actually had. For most, marriage wasn't about feelings. It was about survival, land, and livestock. Still, that didn't stop anyone from sneaking in a little heart flutter when they could. Imagine you're walking through a small medieval town at dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys, the air smells of stew, and you hear laughter echoing from a nearby courtyard. There's a feast, tonight a wedding. You slip inside, drawn by the warmth and candlelight. The tables are rough wood, crowded with trenchers of bread, roasted meat, and cups of ale. Music fills the hall, pipes and drums, maybe a fiddle if someone got lucky. The bride and groom sit at the center, looking both thrilled and terrified. They probably met only weeks ago. Their parents arranged everything. Yet tonight, for a few hours, they let themselves believe it's love. A bard sings about Tristan and Isolde, that famously tragic pair. The guests sigh, laugh, drink more ale. Between the verses, you catch sight of the way the bride glances at her new husband, half shy, half curious. It's awkward, but sweet. You can tell they're strangers learning how to be partners. In that candlelit chaos, love becomes something new. Not poetry, not rebellion, just a quiet agreement. We'll make this work. And often, they did. People built affection the same way they built homes, slowly, with patience, and a lot of repairs. Of course, not all unions were so gentle. In noble circles, marriage was a chessboard. Every wedding was a move in a larger game of power. A duke might marry off his daughter at 12 to cement an alliance. She'd arrive at a castle far from home, surrounded by strangers, clutching a small wooden cross for comfort. Her new husband might be twice her age, sometimes kind, sometimes not. It sounds cruel to us, and often it was. But in that world, love had to find strange corners to survive. Maybe a maid brought her letters from home. Maybe she raised her children and taught them the kindness she never got. Sometimes, she found friendship with a fellow noblewoman who understood. Affection, in its quietest form, still managed to bloom in those stone halls. Back in the village, things were different, but not entirely. Parents still had a say. Dowries were a big deal. A poor farmer's daughter couldn't just marry the handsome blacksmith unless someone's purse balanced the scales. Money didn't buy love, but it sure decided who got to try. Still, young people found ways around it. There were festivals, May games, and church fairs, perfect opportunities to accidentally spend time together. A dance around the maypole wasn't just about ribbons. It was a socially acceptable way to hold hands without getting side-eyed by a priest. The church, by the way, had a complicated relationship with love. Officially, marriage was sacred. Unofficially, priests spent half their time sorting out messy situations, secret vows, broken promises, elopements gone wrong. The church didn't even require a priest to perform a marriage until much later. All you needed was consent. Two people saying, "Yes, we do." Sometimes in a field, sometimes in a barn, sometimes while hiding from angry parents. And so, love could be both rebellious and ordinary. You could be wed in a grand cathedral or behind a haystack. It all counted. As long as you both agreed, and maybe someone heard it, it was binding. Though good luck proving it later, if things went south. Then there were the love tokens, the medieval version of a relationship status. A favor from a girl might be a ribbon, a glove, or a small cloth embroidered with her initials. A boy might wear it tied to his belt or around his arm. Everyone in town would notice, whisper, and pretend not to. Sometimes those small gestures turned serious. A night of dancing led to secret meetings, which led to promises, which led to complications. The church records are full of cases where someone swore they were married by word, and the other person disagreed. It got messy fast. Lawyers, well, church lawyers, were kept busy. But for every scandal, there was a quiet story too. A shepherd and a milkmaid who grew old together. A carpenter and his wife who sang as they worked. Their love didn't make the poems, but it lasted longer than any courtly affair. As the night deepens in your mind's eye, the wedding feast is still going. Torches flicker, shadows dance on the walls, and the music slows to a hum. People drift outside into the cool air. Fireflies blink in the grass. The couple slips away from the crowd for a breath of quiet. They don't speak much. Maybe they just look up at the stars, realizing how small and vast the world feels all at once. For the first time that day, it's not about alliances or dowries or expectations. It's just two people, standing under the same sky, wondering if they can learn to love each other. And maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But that's the thing about medieval love. It was uncertain, fragile, and completely human. Beneath all the rules and rituals, it was still the same hope we carry today, that someone might choose us, not for what we have, but for who we are. The village settles into sleep now. The laughter fades, the torches burn low. Somewhere, a lute still plays a slow, gentle tune. The night smells of grass and wood smoke and distant rain. You breathe it in, and for a moment, you can almost feel the heartbeat of that old world. Love wasn't easy then, and it isn't now. But the fact that people kept trying, that's the real story. They kept meeting by wells, slipping notes through doors, whispering across pews, and risking everything for a glimpse, a smile, a promise. It wasn't perfect, it was real. So, as you drift into that soft medieval night, remember, even in a world of stone castles and muddy roads, people still waited by wells, still carved hearts into wood, still believed in something tender. The stars above them are the same ones above you, now steady, patient, eternal witnesses to every love story that ever was. Those same stars glimmer over a quiet countryside, where the only sounds are crickets and the slow creak of a water wheel. Beneath them, another story is unfolding, smaller, humbler, and somehow more real than all the noble romances sung by minstrels. It starts with the sound of hooves crunching over dirt and a soft knock at a wooden door. Inside, a candle flickers in a cottage kitchen. A woman stirs a pot of stew, her hair wrapped in a kerchief, her sleeves rolled up. The knock makes her jump. It's too late for visitors. She wipes her hands on her apron, opens the door, and there he is, the shepherd from across the hill, holding a small bundle of wildflowers. He looks sheepish, like a man who rehearsed this moment all day and still doesn't know what to say. Evening, he mumbles. She smiles, because what else can you do when someone brings you flowers plucked straight from the pasture? That's the thing about love in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just whispered under banners or written in poetry. It lived in kitchens, in muddy boots, in awkward gestures that somehow meant the world. The shepherd sits down at the table, hat in hand. They talk about the weather, the sheep, the harvest. It's not exciting, but it's warm. You can almost hear the low hum of a life-built one shared meal at a time. Outside, the night deepens. The candle burns low. The world beyond those cottage walls is cold and uncertain. Wars, taxes, sickness, but here, there's something steady. Two people who, for tonight, have found company in the quiet. Meanwhile, in the city, yes, there were cities, noisy and crowded. Even then love had its own strange rhythm. The air smelled of smoke, spices, and humanity. Narrow streets tangled together like vines. Markets buzzed with traders shouting prices and gossiping between deals. And somewhere among the chaos, someone was flirting. Picture a young apprentice in a leather apron, eyes darting across the crowd. He spots a girl selling ribbons from a cart, her fingers stained with dye. He pretends to need thread he doesn't actually need, just to linger. "Nice color," he says, pointing to a crimson ribbon. She grins. "For you, bit bold, don't you think?" And that's it, a spark, buried under sarcasm and market noise. They keep meeting by accident, always near the same cart. It's not much, but for people whose lives revolved around work and prayer, these small exchanges were everything. Dating wasn't a word they used, but the dance was the same. Find an excuse to meet, share a joke, let a touch linger just long enough to mean something. Hope nobody's watching, or secretly, hope they are. Of course, sometimes people wanted something faster. The Middle Ages had no shortage of taverns, inns, and bathhouses, where affection came with a price tag. The church frowned on it, naturally, but that didn't stop anyone. Humans have always found loopholes in morality when loneliness sets in. In towns like London or Paris, you might hear laughter spilling out of a tavern door late into the night. Inside, the room glows with firelight and mischief. Men gamble, drink, and boast. Women with painted lips lean in, telling stories that aren't quite true. Somewhere in that haze, love, or something close enough to it, briefly exists. For some, it was survival. For others, escape. But even there, amid the ale and noise, you could find tenderness. A glance that lingered a moment too long. A small kindness exchanged between people used to being invisible. The truth is, love in the Middle Ages didn't fit into neat categories. It wasn't always pure or tragic or noble. It was messy, awkward, improvised, just like today. And yet, for all its differences, people still believed love had power. They believed it could heal, transform, or destroy. That belief shaped everything from how they prayed to how they dreamed. In monasteries, monks wrote poems about divine love, trying to describe a feeling so intense it bordered on earthly. Some lines could easily be mistaken for romantic longing. "My soul thirsts for thee," one monk wrote, as a lover for his beloved. Maybe that's what makes medieval writing so haunting, how often spiritual devotion and human desire blur together. And outside those monastery walls, people practiced their own rituals for love. Superstitions bloomed like weeds. A girl might toss herbs into a fire to see which way the smoke blew toward her future husband, or away. A boy might carve his beloved's name into a tree, believing the bark would protect her. And if you wanted someone to fall for you, there were charms for that too. Honey mixed with certain herbs, whispered over with secret words. It sounds strange now, but when life was fragile and medicine uncertain, love felt like magic, and maybe it was. Now imagine you're standing on a hill at dawn, mist curling over the fields. A young couple meets there, hidden from prying eyes. They don't have much, just stolen time, and a promise that feels too big for the world they live in. He gives her a token, a small piece of polished bone carved into a heart. She tucks it into her sleeve. They talk quietly until the sun burns away the fog. Then they part, walking back toward the duties that will fill the day. It's bittersweet, but also strangely peaceful. Love then wasn't about grand gestures. It was about finding moments of stillness in a world that rarely stopped moving. As the day warms, the village comes alive again. Bells ring. The baker opens his shutters. The girl from the well walks past, carrying a basket of bread, her hair catching the light. Somewhere, a shepherd hums an old song, and the tune drifts on the wind like a half-remembered dream. You can almost feel the centuries peel away. Beneath all the noise of modern life, that same rhythm of connection still beats quietly. People still look for each other, still hope for something gentle, still wait by their own wells, whether they're real or digital now. The medieval world may have been rough, but its people carried hearts just as fragile as ours. Maybe that's why stories of knights and maidens, of farmers and lovers, still reach us. They remind us that love, at its core, hasn't changed. The stars fade now, giving way to the pale light of morning. Smoke rises from chimneys, roosters call, and life begins again. Somewhere, two people are meeting for the first time. They don't know what will come of it, but they smile anyway, and in that small moment, the entire history of human affection quietly repeats itself, and it keeps repeating, again and again, in every corner of that old medieval world. From quiet villages to grand castles, love always finds a way to sneak into the story, even when no one's supposed to be writing about it. Somewhere, a scribe bends over his parchment by candlelight, copying sacred texts, pretending not to notice that the margin of the page already has a little doodle to tiny hearts carved into the corner. In another room, a young woman mends a tunic by the fire. She hums softly, unaware that the song she's singing is one that's been passed down for generations, a love ballad about a plowman and his sweetheart. The melody is older than memory itself. She probably doesn't even know where she learned it. It's just always been there, like the smell of bread or the sound of the rain. Love wasn't a luxury in the Middle Ages, it was a quiet act of defiance. You didn't need a fancy hall or silk gown to feel it. Sometimes all it took was a shared glance in the middle of hard work. Imagine two people harvesting grain, side by side under the burning sun. Sweat on their brows, dust in the air, hands brushing for just a moment. That's all. But that one small touch meant everything in a world where comfort was rare. And then there were the songs. Oh, the songs. If you've ever wandered through a medieval village at twilight, you'd hear them, faint tunes drifting from taverns, fields, and windows. Love songs weren't just entertainment. They were the news, the gossip, the collective dream of people who worked too hard and hoped too much. Some songs were playful, about teasing and flirtation. Others were heartbreak stitched into melody. They told stories of shepherds waiting by rivers, knights riding into danger, girls spinning wool and whispering to the stars. Even when they didn't have much, people always had their voices, and their hearts found ways to sing. But not all love stories ended in laughter or marriage. The Middle Ages had no shortage of heartbreak. Lovers separated by war, plague, distance, or simply by duty. Imagine a knight saying goodbye before a campaign. His horse snorts softly in the dawn mist. She stands in the courtyard, clutching his scarf, knowing it might be the last time she sees him. He promises to return. She tries to believe him. The drawbridge lowers. The sound of hooves fades into the trees. Months pass. The world keeps turning. Letters take weeks, sometimes months, to travel. When one finally arrives, dawn, dirt-stained, but still sealed, she holds it like treasure. The words inside are simple, shaky, written by firelight. I think of you when the stars are cold. That's all. But it's enough to keep her going. For peasants, love had to survive in even harsher soil. When famine struck or war swept through, affection didn't vanish, it just got quieter. A husband would give his wife the last piece of bread. A wife would keep the hearth warm, waiting for him to return from the fields. Love wasn't a story for them. It was a duty, a comfort, a survival tool. But even then, people found ways to keep a little romance alive. A carved spoon, a flower pressed in a psalm book, a hand held during Mass when no one was looking. They couldn't afford the luxury of dramatic gestures, but they didn't need them. The church preached that love should be chaste, pure, and holy, but people were still people. They fell in love where they shouldn't, whispered where they shouldn't, and sometimes got caught. And when they did, things got complicated. There were court records full of these little dramas. Two people accused of unlawful affection, a promise made under a tree that someone else claimed was a marriage. Sometimes it ended in punishment. Sometimes the priest just sighed and told them to behave. But beneath all that judgment, there's something almost tender. You can sense that everyone, even the priests, secretly understood what it felt like to care too much. In noble courts, the tension was even greater. You weren't supposed to love your husband if he was chosen for politics, and you definitely weren't supposed to love anyone else. But hearts don't follow orders. Ladies-in-waiting, pages, knights, and poets all played dangerous games behind those stone walls. Love letters hidden in books, rings slipped through hands, glances exchanged across candlelit halls. It was a whole silent language. Some even turned it into art. Troubadours, wandering poets from southern France, made a career out of singing about impossible love. They'd stand in great halls, lute in hand, telling stories of yearning that would make even the hardest baron wipe a tear from his beard. They spoke of devotion that asked for nothing, that expected no reward, love for love's sake. It sounds romantic, but it was also political. A clever troubadour could flatter a noble lady, praise her virtues, and subtly remind everyone of her power and grace, all while pretending it was just poetry. And for a world obsessed with status, that was no small thing. But back in the countryside, away from castles and courts, people had their own way of showing affection, honest, clumsy, and sweet. A man might build an extra stool just so she could sit by the fire. A woman might save him the biggest piece of bread. A small kindness in a hard world spoke louder than any sonnet. Now imagine a cold winter evening. Snow drifts against the cottage door. Inside, the fire burns low. A couple sits together in silence, their hands wrapped around cups of weak ale. The baby's asleep in a basket near the hearth. They don't speak, but the air between them hums with quiet understanding. They've shared hunger, laughter, loss, and still somehow they choose to share this moment too. That's love, medieval style. It's not grand or poetic. It's steady, real. The kind that lasts not because it's easy, but because there's nowhere safer to put your heart. And when spring comes again, life stirs back to color. The fairs return, the dances, the laughter. The same people who braved the winter now stand under blooming trees, reminding themselves that joy always returns. Maybe a shepherd finally finds the courage to hold her hand in daylight. Maybe a widow laughs for the first time in months. Love, in all its small miracles, begins again, because that's how it always went. The seasons turned, the stars looked down, and in every corner of that rough, candlelit world, someone reached out for someone else just to feel a little less alone. So as you sit here, eyes heavy, imagining that faraway time, remember, every story of medieval love, grand or small, noble or humble, was really about survival, about keeping the warmth alive in a world that was often cold. And maybe, just maybe, that's why those stories still echo, because even now, under different stars, people are still waiting, still hoping, still whispering the same timeless words. I think of you when the stars are cold. The ink on that old letter fades with time, but the feeling behind it doesn't. It drifts through the years like a breath on cold air, soft and steady. I think of you when the stars are cold. You can almost hear it whispered across 1,000 winters by knights in armor, by farmers in fields, by women at windows waiting for footsteps that might never come. And yet, they always waited. Because that's what love meant then, not instant messages or impatient swipes, but waiting. The slow kind. The kind that asks for faith. Imagine a small stone house on the edge of a forest. The woman who lives there keeps her candle burning late, mending clothes for the men who guard the roads. She listens for hoofbeats every night, though she never says why. When one finally comes, she doesn't rush to the door. She just smiles to herself, finishes her stitch, and says quietly, "He's home." In the Middle Ages, love wasn't loud. It lived in small gestures, quiet loyalty, and shared work. It wasn't about chasing butterflies, it was about tending the same fire together through storms. But that doesn't mean people didn't dream. Everyone did. Even the poorest farmer could listen to a bard's song and imagine a life grander than their own. In taverns and town squares, stories of romance spread faster than the plague. Knights rescued maidens, maidens defied fathers, and love conquered all, at least in the songs. Reality was rougher, but the dream helped people breathe through the days. Picture a midsummer fair. The air smells of roasted meat and sweet cider. Jugglers toss flaming torches while children chase each other through the grass. Musicians play fast tunes on fiddles, and for a few hours, everyone forgets about their debts, their lords, and their chores. You notice a boy mud on his boots, straw in his hair, staring at a girl by the ribbon stall. She's pretending not to see him, of course. She chats with her friend, adjusts her shawl, laughs too loudly at something that wasn't funny. He shuffles closer, holding a coin, heart pounding. "One red ribbon, please," he says, voice cracking. She smiles, slow and knowing, and ties it neatly into a bow before handing it over. "For luck," she says. He nods, but everyone knows what that ribbon really means. That's how it happened. No grand speeches, no dramatic vows, just ribbons, glances, and hope. The kind of love that slips quietly into a life without asking permission. The fair goes on. Couples dance in the grass, skirts swirling, laughter echoing across the valley. Old women sell charms promising eternal affection, herbs tied in silk, bits of bone carved with strange symbols. Whether they worked or not didn't matter. Belief was part of the magic, and when the sun sets and the last song fades, people head home under a sky full of stars, holding hands, holding promises, holding the small warmth of something real. But not every story ended with laughter. The Middle Ages had its heartbreaks too, and they could be brutal. When plague came, it tore lovers apart overnight. Whole families vanished between one sunrise and the next. Sometimes a boy would leave a village in the morning and return days later to find everyone gone. And yet, even then, love left traces. Rings buried with their owners, notes scrawled on scraps of parchment, words carved into the wood of a doorframe. "Remember me." Those tiny messages outlived the people who wrote them. It's strange to think about how the simplest acts, the smallest words, become the loudest echoes across time. Up in the castle, the stories looked different but felt the same. A noblewoman might gaze out from her balcony, her hands wrapped in a shawl, watching the moon over the courtyard. She's married to a man she barely knows, but her heart belongs to a knight sworn to her husband's service. It's hopeless, dangerous, but she can't help it. Every time she hears armor clink in the hall below, her pulse betrays her. He knows too. They steal moments, passing notes through servants, exchanging a look across the chapel. That look alone could get them both ruined, but it's worth the risk. For them, love is both punishment and salvation. And somewhere, perhaps in another hall, a poet watches them and quietly writes it all down. He changes the names, of course, turns their pain into legend. That's how stories like Lancelot and Guinevere were born, not from imagination, but from the dangerous, beating hearts of real people who wanted something forbidden. Love wasn't safe then. It could cost your home, your name, even your life. But people still chased it. They always did. Maybe because it was the one thing that made the world feel human. Back in the village, love kept moving in smaller, simpler ways. A man comes home from the fields, shoulders sore, hands rough. His wife ladles soup into a bowl, wipes her forehead, and sits beside him. They don't say much. They don't need to. The firelight flickers over their faces. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, but inside, there's peace. And in that stillness, you realize something: the grand romances in castles and the quiet ones in cottages were really the same story, just different settings, same heartbeat. Everyone, everywhere, wanted to be seen, to be known, to be chosen. The centuries might blur the details, armor traded for shirts, torches for phone screens, but the need stays the same. The Middle Ages may have been cold, harsh, and uncertain, but love warmed it from the inside out. Now, imagine walking through that old world one last time tonight. The streets are empty, the fire's dying low. You hear distant laughter from a tavern, the gentle ring of a bell from the chapel. a cat slips across your path, tail flicking. Somewhere, two silhouettes stand close under a wooden archway, whispering goodnight. The air smells of rain and smoke. The stars glimmer above, ancient and patient. You think of every soul who's ever stood under them, waiting, hoping, loving. The world may change, but the stars don't, and under them, the same stories keep unfolding, quiet, fragile, eternal. So maybe that's what makes medieval love so haunting. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real, and that's what lingers. Long after the fires go out and the letters fade, the feeling remains. I think of you when the stars are cold. The wind sighs through the trees, carrying those words into the dark. You close your eyes and imagine them drifting through time, from one heart to another. Never really lost, just waiting to be remembered again. The fire in the hearth burns low, its glow trembling across the old wooden beams. The sounds of the medieval night are quiet, now just the sigh of wind outside. A dog's faint bark far away, the soft hum of a world that's finally gone to sleep. You stay there, half awake, half dreaming, thinking about those words still floating somewhere out there. Never really lost. It's a strange comfort, isn't it? That maybe love never truly disappears, just waits for the right century to be remembered. You can almost hear voices carried by the night, whispers from distant rooms, laughter from long-gone taverns, promises made beside candlelight. In the Middle Ages, love wasn't just a feeling, it was a story people told to keep the dark away. And when the nights stretched long and the winters pressed cold, those stories mattered more than food. They kept people warm. Picture yourself walking down a narrow cobbled lane, moonlight gleaming off wet stones. The houses lean close, their thatched roofs almost touching, as if gossiping about who's been sneaking out to meet whom. You pass a baker's shop, shutters closed, the faint smell of flour still hanging in the air. There's a cat curled in the doorway, watching you with that eternal, unimpressed expression all cats have had since the dawn of time. Ahead, you spot two figures standing in the shadow of a chapel. A man in a coarse wool tunic, his hands tucked behind his back, and a woman in a simple cloak. They speak in low voices, heads close. You don't hear the words, but you can guess. The gentle awkwardness, the hesitant smiles, some things never change. He offers her something small, maybe a carved wooden brooch, maybe a sprig of rosemary, maybe just his hand. She takes it, eyes down, shy but certain. And in that quiet exchange, there's more sincerity than in all the songs and poems of the age. Love, back then, wasn't about grand gestures, it was about finding a moment of peace in a life full of noise. They part ways, disappearing into the night, and you keep walking. Somewhere, a door creaks open. Somewhere else, a baby cries. The air smells of smoke and earth, and you realize you're walking through centuries of longing, every step echoing with stories that never quite ended. In another village, miles away, a different story unfolds. This one's about a blacksmith named Tomas and a woman called Ellen. He works long days at the forge, sweat on his brow, sparks flying like fireflies. She passes by each morning, carrying water from the well. For weeks, they only exchange glances, too shy, too bound by custom to speak openly. But one morning, he leaves a small horseshoe on the well's edge, a token, hammered smooth, shaped with care. She finds it, blushes, and the next day, leaves behind a single flower. A trade begins, iron for petals, petals for hope. Neither says a word, but soon everyone in the village knows. The blacksmith and the flower girl, they whisper. And on a night of midsummer, under a full moon, Thomas finally gathers his courage. He walks to her door, heart thudding like his hammer against the anvil, and simply says, "Would you share my fire?" No poetry, no song, just 5 honest words. And she says yes. It wasn't a fairy tale. Their roof leaked. The forge smoked too much. They argued about salt and bread, and where to hang the drying herbs. But every winter, when the cold crept in, they'd sit close by the fire, her head on his shoulder, the horseshoe still hanging above their hearths, still shining faintly with the warmth of the night it was made. That's what medieval love looked like most of the time, not epic ballads or dangerous affairs, but two people choosing each other again and again in a world that didn't make it easy. And yet, the songs still mattered. They gave people something to dream about. A poor man might hear a minstrel sing of a lady's golden hair, and imagine that one day, someone might sing about his Ellen too. A young girl might hear about brave knights and think of the boy who brings her bread from the bakery each morning. It was a kind of shared hope, a soft rebellion against the harshness of life. Love stories were like candlestiny lights in a world that could be very, very dark. As you walk further, the lane opens into a town square. The stalls are empty now, just scraps of straw and apple peels left behind. But in your mind, you can still see it alive with color, the chatter of merchants, the hum of gossip, the music of fiddles and laughter. You can almost hear a group of girls teasing one another about secret admirers, their laughter mixing with the clatter of hooves on stone. The storyteller sits by the fountain, spinning a tale for whoever lingers. His cloak is frayed, his voice rough from travel, but his words draw pictures so vivid, you can almost see them. Tonight's story is about love. Of course it always is. A princess trapped in a tower, a knight who climbs the wall, a kiss that breaks an enchantment. The listeners sigh, some roll their eyes, but no one walks away. Because even in a time when life could end with a single bad harvest, people still wanted to believe that someone was worth risking everything for. That belief, more than anything else, is what defined the Middle Ages. Not the castles or the crowns, not the wars or the plagues, but the simple, stubborn hope that love might outlast the world. The storyteller finishes, tips his hat, and fades into the night. You're left standing there, the fountain murmuring quietly beside you, the moon hanging heavy above. Somewhere nearby, a lute begins to play a soft, wistful melody. It drifts through the air like memory, slow and sweet. You close your eyes, listening, and you can almost feel time folding in on itself. The song feels ancient and familiar, as if you've heard it before, maybe in another life, another dream, another story told by another fire. It's the same tune people have hummed to themselves for centuries while thinking of someone they loved. The notes fade, but the warmth stays. The stars shimmer overhead, and you realize how strange and beautiful it is that across hundreds of years, through wars, famine, and silence, one small thing has never changed. Someone is always out there, standing in the moonlight, hoping. Someone is always out there, standing in the moonlight, hoping. Maybe that's the truest thing about love. No matter the century, there's always someone waiting. The setting changes, the clothes change, the language shifts, but the feeling that stays. Picture a sleepy medieval village wrapped in silver fog. The streets are quiet except for the faint drip of rain from thatched roofs. A young man walks down the lane, holding a small loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. He's not bringing it home. He's taking it to the cottage by the mill. There's a girl there who smiled at him once in the marketplace, and that was enough to rearrange his whole heart. He stands outside her door for a long moment, trying to think of something clever to say, something that doesn't sound like every line from a minstrel's song. Finally, he gives up and just knocks. The door opens. She looks at him, then at the bread, then at him again. "It's still warm," he says, and she smiles. "Then come in before it cools." That's it. That's how it starts. Not with poetry, not with fireworks, just bread and warmth, and the kind of quiet understanding that doesn't need explaining. Inside, the fire crackles. She pours him cider. He fumbles for words, and outside, the rain drums on the roof like a lullaby. Two people in a small world, trying to find a little light in it, and as they talk awkwardly and softly, the conversation drifts like the smoke from the fire. "Do you ever wish you could see the sea?" she asks. He shakes his head. "Not really, but I'd like to hear it." She nods, thinking that's the best answer anyone could give. That's the thing about love back then. It was full of small wisdoms like that. It didn't need to be grand to be true. Meanwhile, somewhere in a grander place, a courtly love story unfolds with more silk and scandal. Inside a castle, a nobleman composes a poem for the lady of the court, his words full of devotion and frustration. He'll never touch her hand, never speak her name aloud, but he'll write of her eyes, her grace, her imagined kindness. Courtly love was a performance, a way for men to practice emotion in a world that worshipped restraint. He'll read it to his friends, pretending it's all metaphor, and they'll nod solemnly, pretending to believe him. But everyone knows, and in the corner, maybe the lady herself listens, pretending not to. The game is dangerous, but thrilling. It's love as theater. Down in the village, though, love was more practical and often more fragile. Marriages were alliances, trades of land, or a way to survive. But even in the most arranged matches, affection had a funny way of sneaking in through the cracks. A shared laugh, a kindness on a hard day, a quiet night spent just listening to the rain. People grew into love, the way ivy grows along a wall, slowly, steadily, and beautifully. Of course, not all tales were gentle. Some hearts broke quietly, and others shattered loudly. Jealousy was an tea invented by Shakespeare. It's been haunting people since the first glance across a crowded room. In a world where honor mattered more than happiness, rumors could be deadly. A whispered accusation, a misread letter, and suddenly 2 lives were ruined. Still, people risked it, because even with all its danger, love made life bearable. Now, imagine walking past a tavern late at night. The firelight spills through the cracks of the shutters, and you hear laughter, singing, the clink of cups. Inside, 2 travelers sit close together, heads bent, sharing stories of places they'll probably never see again. Maybe it's not love, not yet, but something about the way they listen to each other makes you believe it could be. Outside, a minstrel leans against the wall, tuning his lute, humming softly to himself. He starts to sing a ballad about lost love and found hope, and for a moment, the whole village listens. Even the dogs stop barking. The song tells of a knight who went to war, and a woman who waited so long that her hair turned silver before he returned. But when he did, she still recognized him, and they wept, not for the time lost, but for the miracle that there was still time left. It's a sad song, but it makes people smile anyway. Maybe because sadness feels cleaner when it's wrapped in music. You keep walking, past the tavern, past the mill, past the sleeping fields. The moon hangs low, touching the roofs like a blessing. You think about how every generation has its own way of falling in love and how every one of them thinks they're the first to feel it this deeply. But really, they're just part of the same story, told again and again with different costumes. Somewhere far away, in a monastery by the sea, a scribe pauses his work. He is copying a manuscripted treatise on theology, but tucked between the pages is a small piece of parchment with a poem written in the margin. Just a few lines. Though vows bind my hands, my thoughts are free. In dreams you walk beside the sea. He sighs, glances toward the chapel door, and hides the scrap again. Love, even for the holy, was never fully banished. It lived quietly in the corners of prayers. The world outside that monastery keeps turning, markets opening, fields waking, hearts breaking and mending again. The rhythm never stops. And as you walk through that rhythm in your mind, the medieval world feels less foreign. The smells, the songs, the small gestures, they start to feel familiar. Maybe because deep down, people haven't changed much at all. By dawn, the mist begins to lift. A rooster crows somewhere. The baker opens his shutters. The first smoke rises from chimneys, curling into the pale sky. The lovers who met in shadows part ways before the sun catches them. The married couple stirs beside the fire, their hands brushing without thought. And the world begins again, full of quiet hopes and silent vows. Love, in every form, secret or steady, fleeting or eternal, moves, like that morning mist. You can't hold it, but you know it's there, softening everything it touches. You stop, take one last look around the sleeping village, and realize that the same moon that watched over these people still watches over us. Every latent text, every quiet confession, every unspoken wish, it's all part of the same ancient story. The only difference is that they wrote theirs in candlelight, and we write ours on glowing screens. But if you listen closely, beneath the hum of the world, you can still hear the faint sound of footsteps on cobblestone, a knock on a wooden door, and a voice saying shyly, "It's still warm. The bread is still warm," and somehow that feels like the most romantic thing in the world. No roses, no ring, just warmth that says, "I thought of you," while it was still baking. The girl laughs softly, brushing a crumb from her lip, and for a moment, the entire world seems to shrink down to the space between them. That's how it worked back then. Love wasn't loud, it was tucked into the rhythm of daily life. A shared loaf, a hand brushed against another, a candle lit a little earlier than usual. It wasn't grand, but it was steady. Outside, the first light of dawn creeps across the rooftops. The roosters start their endless announcements, and the smell of smoke and bread begins to fill the air. The village is waking, the same way it always does, slow, familiar, unhurried. You step outside, the cool air biting your cheeks. A few villagers are already at work, a woman fetching water, a man sweeping the lane, a boy chasing a goose that definitely doesn't want to be caught. It's ordinary life, But if you look close, it's full of tiny stories, tiny, quiet loves that no one will ever write songs about. And yet, they're the ones that lasted. Take the old couple who lived by the well. They'd been together for 40 years, though no one quite remembers how it started. Some say he proposed by accident, others say she never gave him a choice. Either way, they still bicker like teenagers. She scolds him for leaving his boots by the door, and he tells her she snores like a blacksmith's bellows. But when she coughs in the night, he's awake before she finishes, hand already reaching for hers. That's love tooth, the kind that forgets how to look pretty, but never forgets to stay. Meanwhile, in the manor up the hill, things look different. There's a feast tonight, and the servants are rushing around with platters of venison and pitchers of mead. The lord's daughter, Alice, sits before her mirror while a maid braids her hair. Her gown is heavy with pearls and ribbon, the kind of dress that looks beautiful until you have to breathe in it. Downstairs, the hall fills with laughter, the clatter of cups, the distant thrum of a lute. She's supposed to choose a suitor to knight a man with land, money, and, ideally, all his teeth. But Alice isn't thinking about any of them. She's thinking about the stable boy who taught her how to ride when she was little. The one who always looks at her as if he can see, straight through the velvet and the pearls, and into the person she wishes she could be. Their glances tonight will be brief, dangerous, but enough to set her heart racing. Because that's how love worked in castles whispered, risky, and always just out of reach. You can almost see them, her pretending to admire the tapestries, him pretending to adjust a saddle in the corner. A flicker of eye contact, a half smile, and suddenly the whole room feels like a secret. They'll never marry, of course. She'll be promised to someone else before the year is over. But on cold nights, years from now, she'll still remember the smell of hay and the sound of his laughter echoing in the stables. Some loves weren't meant to last, but they still left a mark like a footprint in wet earth that never quite fades. Outside, the rain starts again. The kind of rain that makes everything smell clean and alive. A group of children run through the puddles, shrieking with joy while their mothers shout at them from the doorways. One boy slips, lands hard, and then bursts out laughing anyway. You watch them and realize that maybe love isn't just between two people. Maybe it's also in the way a community holds itself together, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers offering bread to one another when times are rough. Because back then, survival depended on connection. No one could afford to be truly alone. You needed each other to trade, to build, to share warmth. And in that dependence, love found endless shapes. There was romantic love, yes, but there was also friendship, loyalty, kinship, the quiet affection between a master and an apprentice, or a midwife and the children she brought into the world. The Middle Ages were hard, but people softened the edges by caring for one another in small, unrecorded ways. Far away, in a monastery library, a young monk pauses over his writing. He's been copying an old manuscript all morning, something dry about moral virtue, but his mind keeps drifting. The candle beside him flickers, and in the small flame, he sees the face of a girl he once knew, before vows and walls. He closes his eyes and whispers a prayer not to forget her, but to remember her kindly. Even devotion couldn't erase the memory of love. Later that night, the same monk will add a tiny note in the corner of the page he's copying. Not in Latin, not in verse, just a few words in his own language. Love endures all things. A confession hidden in plain sight. It's strange, isn't it? How love found ways to survive, even in places where it wasn't supposed to. Behind monastery walls, beneath layers of duty and expectation, it still glowed quietly like embers that refused to die. Back in the village, the blacksmith and the flower girl from earlier now have a child. She toddles through the workshop, clutching a wooden spoon like it's a sword. Her father laughs, her mother sighs, and for a moment, you can feel the weight of time pressing gently on the scene. These small lives, forgotten by history, are the true heart of the Middle Ages. When you strip away the wars and the kings and the crusades, what's left are moments like these: a child's laugh, a shy gift of bread, a promise whispered in the dark. That's what carried humanity through centuries of hardship. Night falls again, the torches are lit, the taverns fill with noise, and the same old songs begin to play. Lovers meet in doorways, old men share stories they've told 100 times, and somewhere a lonely heart looks up at the stars, still hoping. You realize something then. Love was never rare in the Middle Ages, was everywhere, in every act of kindness, every risk taken, Every moment someone chose warmth over fear. The world was harsh, but the people inside it weren't. And as you drift, slowly, into that thought, the village around you begins to fade. The sound of rain becomes a lullaby. The flicker of the fire becomes a dream. And for just a heartbeat, you feel it, the echo of every soul that ever loved before you. They're all still out there, somewhere in the folds of time, standing in the moonlight, waiting, hoping, loving, just like us. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear them. All those hearts that came before, beating softly beneath the noise of history. The Middle Ages weren't quiet. Not really. There was always a forge hammer ringing, a rooster yelling, someone yelling at the rooster, but beneath it all, there was this steady hum of people just loving each other in their own clumsy, honest ways. Imagine walking through a medieval fair at twilight. Lanterns sway on ropes above the stalls, casting warm, flickering light over faces flushed from mead and laughter. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the sweetness of baked apples. A juggler tosses knives dangerously close to a nervous onlooker, and somewhere nearby, a minstrel begins to play a love song. Not one of those noble, tragic ones about knights and forbidden longing. No, this one's about a baker's daughter and the shepherd who keeps stealing her pies. The crowd laughs, a few people sing along, and you can see couples standing a little closer together as the melody drifts through the air. Love songs back then were a kind of magic. They didn't just tell stories, they gave people permission to feel things out loud. When you lived in a world where life was mostly about survival, love was a small rebellion. Singing about it made it real. Near the edge of the fair, a girl sells ribbons. Red for passion, blue for loyalty, white for hope. She's maybe 16, her hands stained from dye, her smile quick and practiced. A boy stops at her table, pretending to study the colors, though it's clear he only came for the girl herself. Which one brings luck? He asks, voice too casual to be accidental. She grins. Luck for what? For being brave enough to ask a question like that, he says. She laughs, ties a red ribbon round his wrist, and says, then may your courage never fade. He walks away grinning, and she watches him go, shaking her head. Later that night, she'll think about that small exchange while untying the coins from her apron, wondering why her chest feels a little lighter. Tiny moments like that, they're the bones of history that no one writes about. Every time two people smiled across a crowded fair, every time someone tucked a note beneath a loaf of bread, those little sparks kept the world warm. But for every story of shy smiles and soft words, there were others, complicated, messy, aching ones. Love didn't always fit neatly inside the rules of the time. There was Maud, for example, a widow who ran the tavern by the crossroads. She was loud, clever, and a little too fond of ale, which meant people both liked her and whispered about her. One evening, a traveling minstrel stopped by, singing for his supper. He had kind eyes, a voice like honey, and a habit of smiling at her a second too long. By the third night, he wasn't sleeping in the guest room anymore. For weeks, the village buzzed with gossip, half shocked, half thrilled. Imagine, they said, falling for a man who'll be gone by spring. But when spring came and the minstrel did leave, Maud didn't cry. She just poured herself a drink, leaned on the bar, and said, he left me 3 songs. That's more than most ever get. And maybe she was right. Some loves aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to change the air for a while, leave something behind. Down the road, another kind of story unfolds. In the monastery gardens, Brother Hugo tends the herbs, his hands stained green with mint and thyme. He's quiet, devout, and known for making the best remedies in 3 counties. One day, a woman comes to the gate, seeking medicine for her sick husband. She's beautiful, though not in the polished way of nobles, more like sunlight through leaves. Hugo gives her what she needs, refuses payment, and tries to forget her. But she comes again and again, always with gratitude in her eyes and a sadness she doesn't name. He knows he shouldn't notice, but he does. Every time she walks away, his prayers get a little longer. He never tells her how he feels. He never even touches her hand. But years later, when he's old and his sight is fading, he still remembers the smell of mint and the sound of her voice saying, "Thank you, brother." Love in the Middle Ages wasn't always about possession. Sometimes it was about restraint, choosing silence over confession, kindness over chaos. A kind of love that asks for nothing but to be remembered. The world outside keeps turning. Children grow up, fields are plowed, wars come and go. But the rhythm of affection, the way people find each other, lose each other, and sometimes find each other against, is steady. Now, imagine a wedding day. Not one of those royal pageants with gold thread and feasts that last for weeks, but a small village one. A bride in a simple linen dress, a groom in his best tunic. The whole community gathers because weddings were public business. You didn't just marry a person, you married into their village, their family, their way of life. The priest blesses the union, and then comes the feast. Bread, ale, laughter. Someone brings out a drum, someone else a fiddle, and before long, everyone's dancing. Even the old ones. Especially the old ones. The couple looks terrified and happy at once. The groom keeps stepping on her dress, and she keeps laughing about it. When the night ends, the couple is led to their small home by torchlight. The villagers cheer, bang cups, make jokes that haven't aged well in 800 years, and leave them at the door. Inside, the fire flickers, the bed smells faintly of hay, and two people begin their life together, awkwardly but sincerely. That was love in its truest medieval form. Not a fairy tale, not a poem, but a beginning. Later, when they're older and the roof leaks and the children cry, they'll still remember that night, the way the world felt, full of possibility. And when the storms come, they'll hold on to each other like they're still standing under those torches. Outside, the wind rises, the candles flicker. Somewhere in that endless stretch of time, someone else falls in love, and someone else loses it. And the story keeps looping, over and over. You stand at the edge of it all, listening to the hum of history. And maybe, just maybe, you realize that every heartbeat, every sigh, every whispered "I'll wait for you" has never really disappeared. It's just layered under hours, waiting to be heard again. So tonight, as you close your eyes, think of them, those lovers, poets, and dreamers who found each other against the odds. The baker's boy, the widow, the monk, the noble lady, the shepherd, and the ribbon seller. They all loved under the same stars you see now. And maybe that's the most comforting thought of all, that love, in every century, is made of the same quiet courage. The courage to reach out into the dark, and hope that someone reaches back. The courage to reach out into the dark, and hope that someone reaches back. That's what every story of love really is, isn't it? No matter the century, no matter the clothing or the language, even when the world felt smaller, when your whole life might fit between the church bell and the farthest field, the act of saying "I care" was still an act of bravery. Imagine, again, the soft hush of a medieval night. The streets are quiet, except for a dog barking in the distance, and the faint creak of wood as someone shutters their window. You walk through the village, the smell of damp earth rising after a day's rain. Somewhere, two silhouettes linger under an archway, talking in voices so low you can barely hear. Their words are nothing special. "How was your day? Did your father notice? Will you come to the fair?" But they speak them as if the words themselves might vanish if spoken too loudly. That's how fragile it felt. Sometimes, love was a secret carried in glances, not shouted across rooftops. People didn't have privacy like we think of it today. A family might share a single room, divided only by a hanging cloth. Letters could be read aloud by curious hands before they reached you. Every meeting had witnesses. So when two people found a stolen moment alone, under a tree, in a stable, behind the bakehouse, it was like the world held its breath for them. You can picture it. A girl holding a candle, its flame trembling as she listens for footsteps. A boy fumbling with words, he's rehearsed all week, but still can't quite say right. A breeze carries the smell of hay, of smoke, of something human and hopeful. "Do you think we'll ever be allowed to marry?" she asks. "Maybe," he says, "if the harvest is good." Not a declaration fit for poetry, but in that world, that was love, making plans around the rhythm of the land, around things that could fail or flourish depending on rain. Of course, not all stories were kind. There were betrayals and broken promises too. Sometimes love was just another kind of gamble, like the miller's son who ran away with the Lord's daughter. It sounds romantic at first, two hearts defying the world, but they didn't get far. The Lord sent men after them, and the boy was brought back, beaten, while the girl was locked in her chamber for weeks. People whispered about it for years afterward. Some said she escaped again, others said she married an old baron for peace. No one really knows. But they still tell the story, because even failed love is a kind of legend. And then there were arranged marriages, the most common kind. Love didn't always enter the picture until long after the vows, if at all. Two families might sign a contract before the couple even met. Dowries exchanged, land secured, alliances formed. But here's the secret. People still found a way to love inside those constraints. It might start slow, a friendship that grows in the quiet hours after chores, a shared smile at supper, a touch of hands while kneading dough. It wasn't the fiery kind of romance that minstrels sang about, but a steady warmth, a partnership built like a hearth fire, glowing softly through long winters. Picture one of those couples, years into their marriage, the wife stirring a pot, humming softly, the husband mending a shoe, his back aching from the fields. They don't talk much, but when she passes him bread, he squeezes her wrist for just a second longer than necessary. That's love too, quieter, older, but no less real. And then, there were those who never married. Monks, nuns, or simply people who couldn't or wouldn't fit into the mold. They still loved, in their own ways, through compassion, through devotion, through friendship. A nun might spend her life tending to the sick, whispering prayers that sound an awful lot like love letters to heaven. A monk might write poetry about divine beauty, and maybe, somewhere between the lines, you can feel the ache of something more human. Love, in all its shapes, was woven into everything. The tapestries that hung in great halls were filled with scenes of lovers meeting in gardens. The songs sung at harvest feasts were about waiting, longing, reunion. Even the carvings on church doors sometimes showed a sly little Cupid tucked between the saints, as if to say, yes, we see you, humans. We know your hearts can't help themselves. And hearts couldn't. Even in times of plague and war and famine, people still found time to carve initials into trees, to hide tokens in pockets, to dream of someone waiting at the gate. Because hope doesn't stop just because life is hard. If anything, that's when it burns brightest. Somewhere in a castle, a lady sits by the fire, staring at a letter she never sent. Down in a village, a boy stands by the river, skipping stones, wondering if the girl from the fair will ever return his ribbon. And in the monastery, Brother Hugo's candle burns low, the wax melting into shapes that look suspiciously like hearts. All of them are part of the same long thread, the same ancient heartbeat that hums beneath everything. You think of that, standing here in the quiet of your own room, centuries later. The world around you is different now. Bright screens instead of candlelight, messages flying through air instead of words whispered over wells. But the feeling, it's the same. That tiny leap inside your chest when someone looks at you like you matter. That moment when time slows because two people just see each other. It's strange, isn't it? How something so fragile can outlast entire empires. How love, this small, soft thing, survives everything. So tonight, imagine you're back in that medieval world. The stars are out, the fields are sleeping, and somewhere nearby, a lute begins to play. The tune is old, older than memory. You walk toward it, following the sound through winding lanes and patches of moonlight. At the end of the path, you see them, two figures sitting close together on a fallen log, sharing warmth in the cool night air. They don't notice you. They're too lost in each other, talking softly about nothing and everything. The tune drifts, the fire crackles, and the night feels endless. That's how it was, and how it still is. Love is a quiet fire in the dark, stubbornly refusing to go out. And if you listen carefully enough, you can almost hear it still, the heartbeat of all those centuries, keeping time with your own. The heartbeat of all those centuries, keeping time with your own. It's strange to think how many lives have come and gone, all carrying the same quiet ache. Every age has its own kind of romance, but the Middle Ages, well, they did it with a sort of stubborn hope, like they knew the odds weren't in their favor, yet they kept loving anyway. You can almost picture it, the candlelight flickering against stone walls, shadows stretching across rough timber floors, the murmur of voices after the day's work is done. Somewhere, a girl mends a tear in her dress, humming the same song she heard at the fair last week. Somewhere else, a boy sits by the fire sharpening a knife, pretending not to think about her. And in the middle of it all, life goes on. The chickens need feeding, the thatch needs patching, the taxes are due. People fall in love, not in moments of grand passion, but in the rhythm of ordinary days. Between one breath and the next, someone looks up, and there it is, connection. In a small village by the river, there's a weaver named Ellen. She's quiet, good with her hands, and always smells faintly of wool and lavender. Every market day, she sells her cloth in the square. One morning, a tanner named Rowan stops by her stall. He's taller than most, a little awkward, with the kind of smile that looks like it hasn't been used in a while. He needs cloth for a new coat, he says, but he keeps coming back week after week with excuses to short, wrong shade, maybe one more yard. After the third visit, Ellen laughs and tells him he's either the most particular man in the Shire or the worst liar she's ever met. He blushes so hard his ears turn red, and that's the beginning of something quiet and certain. They meet by the river sometimes, where the reeds whisper and the air smells of water and grass. They don't talk much, he's not one for words, and she's learned to find comfort in silence, but there's a warmth that grows between them like sunlight on damp stone. One spring evening, as the sun sinks behind the hills, Rowan gives her a small wooden token carved into the shape of a bird. It's clumsy but made with care. She presses it into her palm, smiles, and says, "Then I suppose I'll have to make it a nest." It's not the stuff of courtly songs. There are no forbidden letters or tragic endings, no knights fighting dragons for her hand. Just two people who find steady happiness in each other's company. And maybe that's the real magic love. That doesn't need to be perfect to be good. Across the fields, another kind of story unfolds. A noble lady, Isolde, sits in her chamber, staring out at the dark horizon. She's married to a man twice her age, a baron who spends more time in war than at home. Her life is made of rules and silks, and prayers for safe returns. But one evening, a troubadour arrives, a poet, with a voice like rain, and eyes that see too much. He's invited to sing after supper. His songs are about knights and loyalty, but beneath them lies a current of longing so sharp she feels it in her chest. When the room empties, he bows, and their eyes meet for the first time. It's the kind of moment that changes the temperature of the world. He leaves the next morning, and nothing happens between them. Nothing that can be written down, at least. But for years afterward, when she hears music drifting from the courtyard, she feels that same acther reminder that love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes, it just passes through, like a bird crossing the sky, beautiful and unreachable. And then there are the stories no one sang about, the ones that lived quietly in shadows. Two women who shared a cottage at the edge of the forest, growing herbs and raising geese. Everyone called them sisters, though they never said so themselves. Or the two apprentices in a distant city, boys who shared a workshop and an unspoken tenderness. That would have been dangerous if noticed. They carved their initials into the underside of a workbench, just once, a secret promise. The Middle Ages weren't kind to those who loved differently, but still, they loved. They found ways through glances, through silence, through the bravery of simply existing side by side. That, too, was part of the heartbeat of their time. If you listen closely, you can almost feel all of it, the laughter, the longing, the hidden sorrow. It's not hard to imagine that same feeling echoing through the centuries, finding you here, now, in the quiet of your room. Because the truth is, people haven't really changed. We still chase the same warmth, still search for someone whose presence feels like a safe place to rest. The clothes are different, the music new, the language is shifted, but that ache is the same, that wish for belonging. You can almost see it if you close your eyes. The medieval world fades in around cobblestone streets, smoke curling from chimneys, the slow toll of the church bell marking time. Couples passing each other in the market, pretending not to look back. The air smells like bread and rain. Somewhere, a man sells flowers from a wooden cart, their colors bright against the gray morning. A young woman stops to buy one, a small white bloom, barely holding together after a long journey. She tucks it into her sleeve, thinking of someone who promised to come back by spring. She doesn't know if he will, but she keeps the flower anyway, because sometimes love is just faith disguised as patience. And in that small act, keeping a fragile thing alive, there's a kind of bravery that history rarely honors. The quiet, everyday courage of people who dared to feel deeply in a world that didn't make it easy. As night settles again over the village, you can almost feel the hush fall over everything. Fires burn low, dogs curl up by the hearth, and the moon glows pale through thin clouds. Somewhere, a couple holds hands in the dark, whispering promises that might not survive the morning. And still, it's enough. It's always been enough. You breathe in, the air heavy with wood smoke and memory. All those stories, all those hearts, still alive in the soft spaces between stars. The heartbeat continues steady, ancient, human. The heartbeat continues steady, ancient, human. It hums beneath everything. like the pulse of the earth itself. You can almost imagine the world breathing along with it. The soft rustle of trees, the gentle clatter of carts returning home, the faint echo of laughter spilling from a distant tavern. All those tiny sounds forming the backdrop to centuries of people falling in and out of love. Let's wander back into that world for a moment. The year doesn't matter. It could be 1150 or 1350 or any other year caught between faith and mud. The night sky is velvet dark, the stars scattered like spilled flour. Down in a village square, the air smells of roasted chestnuts, wet straw, and something sweet, maybe honeycakes. A boy stands there, clutching a bunch of wildflowers he picked earlier, slightly wilted now from nerves. He shifts from foot to foot, waiting for the baker's daughter to finish serving the last customer. His heart thumps in his chest, faster than the rhythm of the lute being strummed nearby. When she finally looks up and smiles, he nearly drops the flowers. They're not much just daisies and clover, but in that moment, they're everything. He hands them over like an offering, and she laughs, tucking one behind her ear. No grand gestures, no poetry, just two kids, standing awkwardly in the glow of lanterns, trying to say I like you without words. That was medieval love, in its truest form. Not knights rescuing maidens or queens swooning in towers. Just people being soft in a world that was anything but. You see it everywhere once you look for it. In the small carved hearts on the beams of old barns, initials hidden in the wood. In the scraps of letters found centuries later, written in faded ink and bad Latin, but still trembling with emotion. To my dearest, may God keep you safe until I see your face again. Words so simple, but so full of hope, they still feel alive when you read them. Somewhere, a nobleman writes to his wife from a battlefield, his parchment smudged with mud. The nights are cold, and I miss your laughter. Somewhere else, a farmer leaves a piece of bread on his doorstep before dawn, because he knows the widow next door has none, and he doesn't want her to know it was him. Not every act of love wore the name of romance, but every one of them mattered. In a monastery by the sea, a young scribe sits bent over a manuscript. He's supposed to be copying sermons, but in the margins of the parchment, he sketches a pair of eyes, then a smile, then faintly, a hand reaching for another. Maybe it's imagination, maybe it's memory, but the ink tells the truth his vows cannot. And in a bustling town square, a fortune teller lays out cards. A woman sits across from her, nervous, twisting her ring. The fortune teller smiles, saying, "You'll find what you've been waiting for, but not where you expect it." The woman laughs, shakes her head, and pays her coin. Later, when she meets the man who helps her carry a water jug after it breaks, she remembers those words. Maybe fate isn't something written in stars, maybe it's written in everyday kindness. Love, in all its forms, was stitched into the medieval world. The troubadours turned it into art, the peasants turned it into survival. The church preached about sin and purity, but people still found their own way through the maze of rules and fear. They met in fields, in markets, in shadows and sunlight. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but always, it mattered. Let's walk, just a little farther, through this world before it fades into dream. The road leads past the mill, across a small bridge, to a field glowing silver under the moon. Two people stand there, their voices carried by the wind. "You'll be gone before sunrise," she says. He nods, "Only until the harvest." She doesn't believe him, but she smiles anyway. That's what people did. They smiled through uncertainty, through loss, through everything. Because love wasn't about certainty, it was about showing up while you could. He gives her a small charm, nothing fancy, just a bit of iron shaped like a cross. "For luck," he says. She tucks it into her sleeve, knowing she'd touch it every night until he returns. Whether he does or not, that hope will keep her warm. The wind picks up, the trees whisper. Somewhere, a night bird calls, and time moves forward again. Years later, the same field is still there. The bridge is gone, the mill is ruins, but the soil remembers footsteps. Maybe the ghosts of those who stood there once still linger, unseen, holding each other beneath the stars. It's comforting, isn't it, to think that all those ancient emotions never really leave. They hang around, waiting to be felt again, reborn in new hearts, new faces. The world keeps changing, but love just keeps happening. Even now, you can feel the echo of it. The way we still look for connection, still build our lives around tiny acts of care. The way a message, a glance, or a shared joke can change everything. If someone from the Middle Ages could step into our world, they might not understand our cities, our machines, or our glowing screens, but they'd understand that feeling. The restless, hopeful ache that makes us stay up at night, thinking of someone else's voice. The tools change, the gestures remain. Where they wrote letters sealed with wax, we send words that travel faster than thought. But at their core, both are the same. Small, trembling attempts to say, I miss you, I'm thinking of you, I hope you're safe. You breathe in and let the thought settle the idea that you are part of a story that began long before you, one that will keep unfolding long after. The same heartbeat that guided medieval lovers through candlelit streets still hums beneath your ribs. And maybe that's what love really is, the quiet defiance of time. A flame passed from one life to another, never fully going out. So as the night deepens and your breathing slows, imagine the world softening around you. The cobblestones fade, the candles dim, and you can almost hear the distant echo of laughter, of footsteps, of whispered promises. Somewhere, far away and very close, the past folds into the present, and in that hush, love waits steady, patient, eternal. And in that hush, love waits steady, patient, eternal. It lingers like the last glow of candlelight before dawn, soft and golden, refusing to vanish even when the world around it moves on. The Middle Ages were never quiet. The clatter of horses, the ringing of church bells, the endless chatter of people surviving one day at a time. But if you listen closely, beneath the noise, you can always find it's that same small, steady rhythm. Someone humming a love song under their breath. Someone whispering a name into the dark. Love wasn't rare then. It was everywhere, hidden in plain sight. A baker slipping an extra roll into a basket because the girl who buys them smiles kindly. A soldier carving initials into his shield before battle. A tired mother singing her child to sleep while her husband mends a boot by the fire. Each one a small act of devotion that said, you matter. In a way, the people of the Middle Ages didn't think of love as a story, it was a practice. Something you did, not something you declared. You didn't say, I love you every day. You proved it by walking miles in the rain, by saving the last piece of bread, by keeping a promise when it would have been easier not to. It wasn't always perfect, of course. People argued, betrayed, and misunderstood each other. But even then, there was this deep understanding that love was a part of being human, like hunger or hope. You couldn't stop it any more than you could stop the tide. In a castle far to the north, a knight lies awake before a campaign. The torches outside his window flicker in the wind. He takes out a small token, a scrap of cloth, embroidered with a single red thread. His wife made it, years ago, before their first child was born. He presses it to his face, breathes in the faint scent of lavender, and feels braver for it. That's what love does, gives courage where reason falters. In a cottage by the woods, an old woman sits by the hearth, her hands gnarled but steady as she spins wool. Across from her, her husband dozes, his head resting against the wall. They've shared 50 harvests together, and though neither hears well anymore, their silence is full of comfort. Sometimes she hums, and he taps his foot in time, eyes half closed. Love doesn't fade. It just changes rhythm. Somewhere else, a young couple argues in the courtyard over who forgot to feed the chickens. The neighbors chuckle, shaking their heads. Tomorrow, the same couple will be seen walking to market hand in hand, pretending the argument never happened. Because love, even then, was less about grand gestures and more about small forgivenesses. The medieval world wasn't gentle, but somehow, love made it gentler. It softened the edges of hard days. It gave people something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. You can imagine it now, the faint light of dawn creeping through the shutters of a small room. A rooster crows. The hearth still glows faintly from the night before. A woman stirs, stretches, and looks over at the man beside her. His hair is messy, his face lined from years of work, but she smiles anyway. She reaches over, brushes a stray bit of hay from his shoulder, and whispers, "It's time." Outside, the fields wait to be plowed, the day ready to begin. But for a moment, everything is still. Just two people, a heartbeat, apart from the rest of the world. That's the kind of love history rarely writes about, the ordinary kind that builds a life, one quiet morning at a time. And beyond them, life continues. Somewhere, a song drifts through a tavern door. Somewhere, a candle is lit for someone who didn't come home. Somewhere, Two people meet eyes across a crowded room and feel that small, impossible spark that makes all the centuries seem the same. If you close your eyes now, you can see them, all the lovers, the poets, the dreamers, the ones who waited, the ones who dared, the ones who never gave up. They stretch behind you like stars across the dark, each one shining with the same light you carry in your own chest. Because that's the secret, isn't it? The Middle Ages ended, but the feeling didn't. The way your heart quickens when someone smiles at you, it's the same heartbeat that echoed in castles and cottages alike. The same rhythm that guided hands to meet, lips to find courage, promises to be whispered under starlight. It's strange to think how love survives everything. Wars, plagues, time itself. The world can crumble, languages can die, but affection endures, passed from one heartbeat to another. Maybe that's what all those medieval songs were really about, not just the thrill of love, but its endurance. The quiet truth that connection is what makes the world bearable, what gives it shape. And so, as you listen now, centuries later, you're part of that same long story. You, lying there in the dark, heartbeat steady, breath slow, thinking of someone or something that makes you feel alive. You're not separate from those medieval souls, you're the continuation of them, the weaver and the tanner, the lady and the troubadour, the monk and the widow, every one of them reaching out into the dark, hoping to be seen, just like you. The night deepens, and the stars above your imaginary village shimmer faintly. Somewhere, a bell tolls. The fields stretch out quiet and endless. The fire in the hearth burns low, and the whole world exhales. And maybe, for just a moment, you feel that thread connect across time, the simple, stubborn hum of being alive, being human, being capable of love. It's soft, steady, and older than memory. So let yourself drift now, back through the centuries, through candlelight and laughter, through the sound of footsteps on cobblestone and the whisper of hands finding each other in the dark, back to a time when love was a whispered word and a promise made by firelight. Let it lull you, this long, endless heartbeat, the same one that carried them, the same one that carries you. And as the night folds around you, remember, no matter the century, no matter the world, someone, somewhere, is still waiting by a well, hoping to be seen.